Today, Goo, we are bringing you a review of the latest and I would say definitively not the greatest
But
Transformers movie.
definitively not the worst.
It's also definitively not the worst. The latest in the Transformers franchise, Transformers Rise of the Beasts. Goo, this movie is a rated PG-13 action, adventure, and sci-fi with a runtime of 127 minutes. Currently, Goo, through 56 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, the old Roddy T's, it's rocking 55% from the critics. That would be the third best critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes. On Metacritic, it has a 41, which obviously is quite low. That's based on 20 reviews, but still fourth best out of all these Transformer movies.
So once again, I don't give two shits about Rotten Tomatoes. But also, I will say that it does feel like the third or fourth best in the franchise.
I agree with you wholeheartedly there. I think in this case, they're right on the nose. They've nailed it.
But I'll also say, like, I don't like the first Transformers movie, but it's not bad. This one is less overwhelming than that first one.
So, yeah, to give some context here for the upcoming review, when the first Transformers movie, 2007, came out, I loved that movie.
Okay.
I was a big fan of that movie. And the years since, that's gone. That is Halloweened.
We used to call him Mackle Bay.
I still, I hated that. I still have a soft spot for that first Transformers movie. Yeah. Additionally, Bumblebee, which came out in 2018, was a very good entry. And that's probably my second favorite movie in this whole franchise.
Let me also ask you, do you think that Bumblebee is a prequel, or because it doesn't reset the original movies, because it kind of references those movies?
So we'll save that. I have relative information on,
because I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, understandably so. And this movie doesn't do anything to help clarify any of the confusion in this
because it also goes back to almost what those original ones were, just framed better action wise, I would say.
Yeah, that Bumblebee was framed as a soft reboot.
No, but I'm saying action wise, the action scenes in Bumblebee are framed way better. Like, you can see all of the Transformers, and it's not just stuff being thrown at you, and it's not like up close shots of like the Transformers' faces.
Sure. Yeah.
This one is framed more like that.
I meant framed as in the context and how they're giving it to us.
I'm talking about the frame of the
you're talking about cinematography. That was sold to us as a soft reboot, which essentially means it is a reboot, but it's also still connected to the original movies. No one really knows, but
is it a preboot? Preboot?
Yeah, that's sort of like the requels in the horror movies, very similar to that. Mm-hmm. This movie is written by a shit ton of people. 5 people, in fact, get writing credits on this movie. The first is Joby Harold, who has written King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. That movie did not do well. Army of the Dead. That movie did not do well. And he wrote the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, That did not do well. So you're sensing a theme here. Maybe this gentleman should not write anything anymore. However, unfortunately for you, he is one of the 2 writers on the upcoming Flash movie. And we'll touch on that in Max Sack, some opening reactions to the Flash.
I don't want to hear them.
That doesn't bode well for that. He's also the writer on the upcoming My Hero Academia movie. So if you're into that, maybe get worried. 2 more writers, This is a writing team. 2 more writing teams, both duos here. Darnell Mateer and Josh Peters. They are the writers on BMF, which is a Starz series. That is a series that 50 Cent is the executive producer on. And they're also doing an upcoming TV series called Vice City, not based on the GTA game, though I wish it was.
What does BMF stand for?
Black Mafia Family, I believe.
Okay.
Like that. Something to that effect.
I thought it was something dirtier.
No, I wish. I'd probably watch it if that were the case. Mm-hmm. And then the other writing team here credited to this movie are Eric and John Hober. They wrote Montana, Whiteout, Red 2, Battleship, The Meg, and My Spy. So again, really, really not great things for the writing room here. Upcoming, these 2 have quite a laundry list of things they're doing. They've written The Meg 2, The Trench, which comes out this year. They are the writers on the Gran Turismo movie. They are writing something called Fast and Loose. And you heard it here first. They are the writers on the My Spy sequel, My Spy, The Eternal City. Anything about that?
Let me ask you a question.
That's that Dave Bautista movie that you didn't like.
Do they have all of these writers working on this movie because they're all working on other things and they all just pitched like one line at a time? Like,
I don't know what the reason for having 3 like distinct writing teams
was it just a bunch of rewrites, you think?
I don't know, but I think you can tell. It doesn't feel like 3 different movies. It just feels poorly written is what this
a lot of the
like.
dialogue is extremely choppy.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. Goo, also that Hober team is writing the Naruto movie, and they're also making a Red TV series. Now, Red is those Bruce Willis movies. Obviously, he will not be in the TV series.
I don't believe so, no.
This movie is directed by Steven Caple Jr., and I thought that sounded familiar, and the reason was because he directed Creed 2. Creed 2, which was...
the bad Creed.
Yeah, the not-so-good Creed. He's done quite a few TV things and then also something called The Land. So pretty unknown up until this point besides that Creed movie. He also doesn't have anything upcoming. I didn't necessarily have issues with the direction in this movie, but it does lack like a true great still or an awesome like great shot of the beasts in this movie, which really bothered me. But other than that, like the cinematography, I didn't quite have an issue with any of that.
Like I said, I think this is a better directed cinematography-wise. It's better than the Michael Bay movies.
I don't know if that's true because Bay got it. Bay got it in terms of like showing the Transformers and giving the Transformers.
I don't think he did though, because a lot of the fight scenes are just so much just clanking and like slow motion up close shots. Whereas this one is at least a little further back and you can see all of the action happening.
Yeah, I don't agree with you on that one. I think Bay delivered on the directing part. I think the stories just were really, really bad. Synopsis of this movie. During the 90s, a new faction of Transformers, the Maximals, joined the Autobots as allies in a battle for Earth. Now,
okay, let me stop you there. Yeah. Not to spoil anything. And look, I'm wearing a Pinky in the Brain shirt right now. I love the 90s. You look behind me, there's a bunch of 90s crap behind me. This slaps you in the face with the 90s so hard that even I said, please stop.
I was okay with that part. I thought you were going to speak to what bothered me here.
Well, I mean, also, let's go ahead and get into this. And this is something that Stranger Things always talks about. Like, oh, Winona Ryder hears a song and she says, wait a second, that didn't happen until this date after, as if she's Google. They have an issue here where this movie... And I had to ask you after, I'm like, this is set in 1994, right? And you said yes, because maybe I had misread it or whatever. They have a song in this, or they have a character singing a song in this that was not popular until the late spring/summer of 1995.
Yep, that was bothersome. But still, you have not touched upon the main thing that bothered me.
What the fuck is your problem then, Mac?
We've already talked about how the writer's room was bad. The character-to-character dialogue was pretty bad.
Yes.
But even the overarching story, which sometimes can be good in spite of bad dialogue, was bad. It was another battle for Earth, end all be all. The planet's going to get destroyed.
I thought some kind of an issue with the 90s. That's what we were talking about.
No. I'll deal with all of that.
Okay.
But the problem is when you have these battle for Earths,
yes,
or for Earth and humanity, you just really have a hard time buying into a lot of the actions of human beings in it.
Yes. And we are coming off of a small scale, pretty much modern day, not modern day because it's set in 1987, but modernized E.T. movie. That's what Bumblebee is.
Yeah.
It's E.T. with robot.
Yeah.
And you are pretty much bringing it back to the end of the world stuff that Bay was doing.
Yeah. And again, that's where it starts to get real messy. Although this wasn't nearly as messy as 4 of those 5 Bay movies. Goo! Yeah. This movie stars Anthony Ramos as Noah Diaz. He was our lead. Dominique Fishback as Elena Wallace. She was a pseudo lead as well. She was pretty bad. And that's one of the first things we talked about too.
She wasn't good.
She wasn't very believable. And the way she reacted to things was subpar.
The way that she reacted to stuff, she kept on being surprised by everything. Like she would stop and get like this stink face of like, oh, what's that? Just fucking run.
Which I understand initially you should be surprised by these robots and whatnot. But like once you're in it,
you do that the first time.
Yeah.
But she kept on doing it. Just run the other way. Her and Noah should be dead multiple times over. They were blown up many of times. And they were chased by these spider transformers that are as bad as the wolves from Beauty and the Beast. They can't kill things. They can't kill humans. They stink.
Yeah, stormtroopers. Dean Scott Vasquez as Chris Diaz, Noah Diaz's younger brother. Luna Lauren Velez as Brianna Diaz, the mother of those two. Toby Nwigwe as Reek. He is an actual recording artist. R&B artist. Lucas Huranaka. I don't know. That's close enough. As Amaru. This was the Peruvian fellow who the Beasts trusted, as you'll remember in the latter half of this movie. Michael Kelly plays Agent Burke, who we'll talk about in the spoiler full section. We haven't seen him in this universe or another universe, but he's a face that you would know, a face that looks very familiar.
Let me ask you a question. They're not question, actually. As you were reading off those names, all I could picture was you being a school teacher and like, is there a Tobey here? Tobey?
The Key and Peele skit.
Toby, actually.
D-Nice. D-Nice. The voices of our Transformers, Peter Cullen is back. He's voiced Optimus Prime in all of these movies. Ron Perlman as Optimus Primal. He was one of the few I actually knew going in. Peter Dinklage as Scourge, one of the bad guys. Michelle Yeoh as Air Razor, one of our heroes. Pete Davidson as Mirage, who I thought if you would pick a standout of the voice actors, I thought he was actually really good. Liza Koshy as RC. John DiMaggio, and that's not Joe, maybe he's related, as both Transit and Stratosphere.
He voices Bender on Futurama, I believe.
Huh?
I think he's the voice of Bender on Futurama.
How about that?
Yeah.
David Soboleff as Rhinox, Battletrap, and Ape-Link. Triple duty there. Credit to him. MJ Rodriguez as Nightbird. Coleman Domingo as Unicron. Cristo Fernandez as Wheeljack. You may know him as Danny Rojas. That's where you would know him from, Ted Lasso.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Tongai Teresa as Cheetor. Those are all our main Transformer players. This movie,
Wait, before you go any further, let me talk about this voice cast. Number one, I wanted more Cheetor. Cheetor is sweet.
Agreed.
You also mentioned Pete Davidson standing out, and when you mentioned to me after the movie, like Ron Perlman was this person, so-and-so is this. If you had told me that it was the same person voicing all of the Transformers, I would have believed you.
It's true. They were all pretty monotone for the most part.
They all sounded the exact same.
Other than Mirage and the Ducati, they all sounded very similar.
Yes.
So speaking to some of your confusion, and I'm sure a lot of the audience's confusion about these Transformers movies, I did a little research, a little background check here.
You research? That doesn't sound like you.
So the Bayaverse, has 5 movies in it. Transformers from 2007, Revenge of the Fallen 2009, Dark Side of the Moon or Dark of the Moon. Dark Side of the Moon is a Pink Floyd album, 2011. Those are the 3 that star Shia LaBeouf. And then they had 2 more that star Mark Wahlberg. Age of Extinction from 2014, and then The Last Night 2017. The Last Night was truly horrific. Age of Extinction was not very good. This movie definitively better than those 2, and I think in conversations as the 3rd or 4th best behind the original and Bumblebee. I would probably go the original 2007's, then Bumblebee, then Dark of the Moon, because I like the conspiracy stuff they get into with U.S. history. Gives it a little bit of a leg over this. Then this, and then Revenge of the Fallen. So it's in that realm. It's not nearly the worst Transformers movie, but I definitely have it a definitive tier, maybe 2 below the top tier. And that sort of reflects out in all these Rotten Tomatoes scores and audience scores and whatnot. Bumblebee, clearly the best for the critics.
Yes.
The original, clearly the best for the audience. And to get into where these are set up, well, first, a little bit. So this is a direct sequel to 2018's Bumblebee. And Bumblebee was a soft reboot of this Transformers franchise universe, what have you. And Bumblebee, because it is a direct sequel, I'll talk about it briefly. Bumblebee was more upbeat. It was a little bit slower paced, but they were able to tell a more human story because it's just got one really gigantic robot and also a fantastic performance from Haley Steinfeld.
Yes.
It's just so hard to achieve the human story that they go for in all of these movies when you have 20 gigantic robots. When it's a 1-for-1 and it's like a buddy cop sort of situation, it's way easier to do. And I think that's why Bumblebee was so successful.
Well, I think Bumblebee also was the first time that a Transformers movie had a likable leading character.
Shia LaBeouf was cool.
I thought Shia was fine, but was he likable?
I'd say so, yeah, because he went from nerd to getting the girl.
That's because you just like Shia.
No. The story of Shia in the first one, I think, makes him likable.
Transformers: The Story of Shia.
So this movie, Goo, Rise of the Beast, is set in 1994. Bumblebee was set in 1987, so it's set 7 years after. And what Bumblebee did was sort of reset some of the canon from the original Transformers franchise, the Michael Bay franchise. But it also kept some of those things. So it does kind of tie in, lead into that stuff. You feel like that Bumblebee character is the Bumblebee character from those movies, but they also changed some of the canon, and specifically like when Optimus Prime landed on Earth and whatnot. And a reason why I love these movies is, number one, the toys are awesome. Great toys. I just like the idea of like being able to change into something too. Like I liked obviously the Beast Wars series that became popular in the 90s based off the original Transformers series, but I also loved the Animorphs books too. So like that's my exact style.
So first off, Mac loves butterflies. Number two, my question to you was so consider me a fucking idiot.
Okay.
But so Bumblebee can change as a car from a buggy to a Camaro? Like he can choose what he wants to look like?
He's got to scan it. So originally he was the buggy. Remember that he scans and then becomes the Camaro. So I feel like if you have it in your hard drive database, you can probably change it.
Okay, that was my big question. I just wanted to know that. I'm like, is this the same Bumblebee? Obviously it is, but they were different cars.
Yes. Yep. And again, so Bumblebee sort of reset what some of those Bay movies established. And since Rise of the Beast is a direct sequel to Bumblebee, and Bumblebee sort of is connected to those Bay movies, I think you can argue both sides of this, that they are separate and that they are in that universe. I don't think we're going to know definitively until a third movie in this run of movies. I'm not sure we're exactly going to get that, but we'll talk about that in a bit. This movie, also in this movie, it introduces the Maximals, which are simultaneous, to add to the confusion. They're simultaneously from an ancient past and from a distant future because they have time traveling technology. And
also, not to spoil anything, I'm not trying to ruin anyone's day.
Yeah,
but you're not gonna get a ton of Maximals.
Yeah, a movie named Rise of the Beast. There's a severe lack of beasts, in my humble opinion.
And you asked the question to me after the movie, or you didn't? You made a statement to me of why were they so big?
Right. That's a visual issue I have as a fan of this franchise. Why is it that the Transformers that turn into vehicles are vehicle sized and not
because
larger?
They're trying to hide, right? That's
and then
the point of them.
The ones that turn into animals are like 30 times bigger than the normal animal.
And they still look like fucking robots. So if a person saw them, they're like, what's up with that giant gorilla?
Clearly not an animal.
That's clearly a robot.
So it's bad for masking your identities. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. This film also introduces the Terracons and Unicron as the villains. And these villains have access to this dark power, essentially because Unicron like harvests it or manifests it. It's all a Unicron centric thing.
I wish they got Orson Welles again.
Unicron is essentially Galactus, right? It's this planet consuming being that's existed for a long time. But this is confusing too, because I'm pretty sure in the original movie, 2007's Transformers, I'm pretty sure Optimus Prime says that Earth is also Unicron, which is like the enemy of Cybertron. So they clearly scrubbed that. And that was that strikes me as something 16 years ago. They didn't think they'd be 7 movies deep repurposing.
Or they just said now, like, we'll pick and choose what we want to use from the old stuff.
Right. Which is why it's confusing whether or not it ties into that.
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff you need to know or need clarification for before or after watching this movie.
Like going into Halloween. I'm not talking about the one from 1978 or the one from 2007, but the other Halloween, they went into it saying, we're only drawing from the other Halloween, not Halloween 2 or any of the other movies.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind.
Well, right. So this movie is only drawing from the Bumblebee movie.
Well, no, it's a sequel to that movie, but it's drawing from the other stuff as well.
Well, it's really not. It's
referencing other stuff.
No, it's drawing from Transformers lore, but it's not touching anything that happened in the Bay movies. But because your natural inclination is to link to those movies, and they don't outright say it's not connected to those movies, you feel like it's still connected. So
they mentioned Mark Wahlberg in this movie.
They do mention Mark Wahlberg as Mark Wahlberg, so that also makes you think it nullifies the Bay movies.
No, it makes me think that Mark Wahlberg was actually Mark Wahlberg in those other movies, but he transformed into someone else.
Oh, more than meets
Mark Wahlberg is a transformer.
Him and Daniel Day-Lewis, 2 top human transformers.
Are you done with your thing?
Yeah, I'm done with explaining stuff.
Okay, so once again, besides the opening scene where, you get a little bit of a battle, but it's more of like hide the key. You don't get any Transformers in this movie until about 30 minutes in, and then you don't get the Maximals until about 75 minutes in.
Yeah, it's a bizarre choice for a movie called Rise of the Beasts, where they do give you beast stuff at the beginning to establish them. But then since we're introducing new human characters, they got to take another 20 minutes and establish them. So you're almost an hour in before you get some like awesome Transformer stuff.
And you accept that if what they give you from the human story is good, original, makes you want more from that.
Yeah.
But the entire time that those humans are on screen there, those one-dimensional humans, you're like, show me the fucking robots.
And I will give the movie credit. Once you start the Transformer fighting, it's pretty much all Transformer fighting from then on out. So at 2 hours and 27 minutes, or what is it, 2 hours and 7 minutes, I feel like it actually was paced all right. Now, what you see on screen, whether you liked it or not, that's a different argument. But the pacing, once you get into the stuff, I thought was good. It's just that first 45 minutes you're like, all right, let's get to it.
And then, credit to these movies, like I said earlier, they're at least trying to make a little more, less of a rougher edge on their lead characters. And with this one, not this big superstar in Mark Wahlberg, but someone that can really blend into the movie with Ramos.
Yeah, and Anthony Ramos, I've seen him quite a few times. You might remember him as Lady Gaga's best pal in A Star Is Born. He's also in Hamilton. He was in The Heights. He's popped up quite a few times. Very talented dude. He can sing and play instruments and shit like that too. So clearly this guy's I feel like he's going to be a big star someday. He's just not quite there. So he's got to be in a movie like this. Yeah. But if you compare him, especially to the lead actress there, he was much better than her.
All right, let's get into the octagon here. Mac and Goo's octagon of how we like movies. First one up here is fun factor. And I will say that every time that I was starting to get into this fun factor wise, they would introduce something new where I would say, well, now I'm not having fun anymore.
Yeah, this movie is definitely fun. There's definitely some fun, maybe I should say. Probably not enough fun. And to your point, and this is sort of why Bumblebee works, I could have lived with the fun action that we got if we got a better human story, better story, or even like a better villain would have propped this up more too.
Oh, the villains in this stink.
Yeah, not good.
No. Satisfactor, were you satisfied by this movie? And I will say that at the end, there was a moment where it was a clean 50-50 of cheer and which that's satisfying, I suppose.
For me, who is a fan, I still remember playing the Beast Wars video game in 1998. I've always been a fan of this stuff, even though I lack knowledge, I guess, of the lore, since this shit came out in the 80s and I wasn't born until 89.
Yeah.
I was a bit disappointed. I was a bit disappointed in the Beasts and what we got from there, or lack thereof. It just should have been way cooler, and it lacked a certain coolness to it.
It is funny that going into this movie, I thought that I had a decent knowledge of the Transformers. I'm not in love with them. I didn't really grow up with them, but I thought I understood them. And around so many turns of this movie, I just kept on saying, wait, what? I don't know anything.
Well, I think also as a Hasbro property who pumped out toys and then sort of added in lore and story afterwards.
Yeah.
They were constantly adding story up and through the 90s into
and
the
adding
2000s.
toys. Yes.
Yeah, and so no one truly knows like the actual, the groundworks of what, other than that original movie, no one really knows like Transformers lore through and through.
And then we talked about this after the movie of, is this what critics that don't understand Marvel feel like after seeing a Marvel movie?
Yeah, no, it was two things I thought of immediately was this. And then the next point, I was wondering like, man, they do throw a lot of stuff at you in this movie. And you also needed some outside knowledge from other movies. So when people see comic book movies with no knowledge of any comic lore, is this what they feel like? Because you come away being like, I should have liked that more, but I didn't understand a lot of it.
Borometer. This movie, I think, was plenty boring, but I do appreciate them leaning into some cheese.
See, I don't know if it was boring. It just wasn't as fun or as cool as it could have been. But it kept that tick up enough to say that it wasn't boring for me.
Aquator. Is this movie better or worse than Aquaman? I am a smidge below, but that's because of the charm of Jason Momoa.
You also like Aquaman a smidge more than I do.
Yes.
And then the second point that I just alluded to, I was thinking about right when we finished this, like, man, do I like this more or less than Aquaman? And I couldn't say definitively. So I would say we're right around that. We're right around the equator. Like, if you like this movie more than me, so be it. But I've forgiven a lot in these Transformers movies, so I'd be surprised if you like this more than me. Although I have read a couple, quote unquote critics that I follow on Twitter, the more so regular guys like we are, the not like art house movie guys, like this movie more than I did. So I don't know what they saw that I didn't. But I can also see, Goo, a lot of people coming away from this movie thinking it's real stinky. So I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
Our theater loved it.
Our theater really liked it.
Halloween. Will your interest in this movie wane over time? I will forget this is a movie.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a big weenie. There's not a ton in here to make it rewatchable. It just lacks that for sure.
Pants 10 City. Excite Bike Mania. What got you going in this movie? Not a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I made the point at the top with a big with the direction and like a big still or a still you would pull from the movie that you could say, oh, this could be a screensaver. There's really not one in here. It's just, there's no true pants tent. It does have like a couple big moments, but nothing that really get even a half chub. And when you finally get some cool beast stuff, you don't just get a clear look at them and what they're doing. It's all over the place. So it does play to your point about a little bit of choppy direction.
Max Credit Union, who are you giving credit to? And I will say the people that worked on it, the CGI people.
I'm going to give credit to Pete Davidson here. I thought his voiceover work as Mirage was very good. And although he is really being Pete Davidson for himself, or for the most part, he put just enough effort in to distinguish it from him as a human and like built a little more character into this. I thought he was pretty good. And like, clearly, if you're talking about like best Transformer characters we've gotten, it's him and Bumblebee, I think, are the top two.
I like the robots' faces. They look good in this.
All right. Fair.
They look different from each other. That's a good thing.
That is good. That is good.
Hot dogs, more that meets the eye.
Hot dogs, sandwiches in disguise.
No, we're not going to do that. We're not doing that. For those who party to the Mackie Goo party, we rate everything on a 40 hot dog rating system. Mac, you are a bigger fan of this franchise and of this line. What did you think?
All right. So this movie, like I said, is definitively better than those two Wahlberg movies, but from there, it's kind of a toss-up. The dialogue simply isn't good, and that's 100% attributed to the writers and those 5 idiots that I just couldn't piece together reasonable dialogue. You just have a hard time buying into the human elements and the world-ending scenario, so that's not a good thing. And speaking of that world-ending scenario, the overarching story of the movie just isn't great. So this movie really relies on how much you liked the Transformers themselves, and I guess maybe the human part a little bit. And for a lot of people, that just isn't going to work. So to me, the OG movie and Bumblebee still stand head and shoulders above the rest of these Transformer movies. I do think you can argue this movie as third best, though, but also probably as low as fifth best. It's not as messy as those first two Bay sequels, but probably not as good of a fun action adventure as either of those two as well. Plus, the third one gets into that like U.S. histories, like National Treasure type shit with the Transformers, which makes it just a little more interesting than this. Pete Davidson's voice work, like I said, as Mirage was very good, provided solid humor throughout. He had clearly like the funniest joke in the whole thing as well.
Yeah.
I also liked, and this was honestly the most interesting plot point in the story in the movie, and they sort of gloss over it. They don't do anything with it. I like how the two primes, our two main big goods, they don't see eye to eye about this stuff. It's a bit of a Magneto versus Professor X thing here, and they just don't explore that like at all. The two sides of the good guys in this is a much more interesting story to explore than the good versus bad story that they had here. So that was sort of a letdown. Speaking of the villains, you know, we were introduced to Megatron, and that's the big bad we know from Transformers anyways in the first movie. He's a much, much better villain than Unicron or his crony Scourge in this. And I think that's what also props up that first movie. And then in Bumblebee, the villain is essentially humans or the military. So that obviously plays as well. This movie being called The Rise of Beasts implies that there would be more Beast stories to come after this, on top of this supposedly being a Beast story. And I just don't think we have any Beast stories left to tell. Plus, we just didn't get enough cool Beast stuff in this in the first place. So that was like that's the real disappointment here, the real letdown. And all that being said, and this is where my bias comes back into it, I'm still intrigued by a couple things going forward here. If these versions of these characters are in fact tied into the Bay movies, I want to see how that plays out. How do they get from 94 to 2007? And there's also here a post-credit scene, a tie-in that was unexpected, that I don't know if it's ever going to be good, but it's certainly intriguing. So that will keep me kind of thinking about these movies. And finally, Goo, even though maybe you didn't like it, I thought this did have a pretty neat 90s-centric soundtrack. So I'm right at 24 hot dogs. It's right on this pass-fail line, barely floating, sinking, however you want to phrase it. It's my 14th movie of 2023 out of 15. So obviously, you know, what are you going to do there? I guess I didn't like it. I don't know. I really don't know. It's the middling movie that we always dread. It's in the same tier as Knock at the Cabin and You People for me, which to me weren't.
That's not good.
Two not very good movies. The only movie behind this on the air is We Have a Ghost, which is bottom 5 movie I've seen in the last 10 years, probably.
All right, Mac, if you like these movies, I'm not talking to just you, but the audience, I'm happy for you. I keep trying. I just can't get into these. And I do like the cheese that they gave us in this. They did lean into the cheese pretty hard, but when it comes to the voices, I can't tell most of the robots apart. I can't tell most of the Transformers apart. And this is after coming off of Bumblebee, which is a smaller scale, better, this human connection with that movie. And you felt the love between Haley Steinfeld and Bumblebee there, that they almost tried to get into this with Mirage and with Ramos, but they never quite achieved that. And I understand that you can't go back to the well on that every single time, but to go back to the well of world ending, smashy, let's throw a bunch of these like spider robots out there to battle. I prefer the smaller scale. This is just too much like the Bay movies that I did not really enjoy it. Whenever I was starting to get into it, it would then get into something really stupid that I would then question myself of, why are you watching this? I have it around a 21, maybe a 20. And that's kind of being generous because I kind of hated this.
I cannot say that your opinion is invalid. I think you have, I think what you watched is probably right around that. I think my bias probably bumps it up 3 or 4 dogs, even though I didn't love the thing. But I also think like there's nothing in here that's like totally offensive or something that you really hated, like not one thing. I get at the end being like, you know what, I didn't like that. But I think like lowest common denominator, I think a lot of like common moviegoers, as we saw in our theater, are probably going to be like, you know what, I liked it.
Yeah, and speaking of the human connection too, it's not just with the main characters. There's nothing to grasp onto with the villains. There's nothing likable or interesting about the villains that makes you wonder more about them. Like, not to keep on comparing it to Bumblebee, but at least Cena was a human being.
Yeah. A human being that you suspect might change throughout the movie. Whereas in this movie, the villain, you knew that what it was what you're getting the whole time.
Oh, hi. It's Goo from the Mac and Goo Movie Club. If you like what you just saw, you can find full episodes of our program on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, CastBox, iHeartRadio, or wherever podcasts are found. And now it's time for girls jumping on trampolines.